Hello and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Hodan Omar and I'm a Senior Policy Analyst at the Center for Data Innovation, which, for those who don't know, is a think tank focused on the intersection of data, technology, and public policy. Today, I'm delighted to host a new author in our book talk series. We are privileged to be joined by Ben Shneiderman, who is an Emeritus Distinguished University Professor in the Department of Computer Science at the University of Maryland and author of the recently published book, Human-Centered AI. Ben, first of all, thank you very much for being here. You have been one of the leading voices and thinkers in this field of AI, human-centered AI, which I'm sure you'll explain much better than me, but seeks to shift attention from an approach to AI that is kind of technology-centered to one that is focused on the human aspects of technology so that AI can better serve human needs. And in your book, you argue that stakeholders ranging from researchers to business leaders to policymakers should be embracing a human-centered AI approach. So I'm looking forward to having you describe what human-centered AI is and why you think it should be fostered. And for everyone who is joining us today, this program is really meant to be interactive and your questions and comments are welcomed and encouraged. So if you're watching online, you're invited to submit questions on Slido. And if you're watching on the Center's website, you can see the link at the bottom of the page to Slido where you can submit your questions. And if you're on YouTube or Facebook, you can see the link underneath the video description. So Ben, thanks very much for spending some time with us today and sharing your thoughts on this topic. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Hodan. Good morning, and appreciate the efforts of the Center for Digital Innovation and the opportunity to speak to you about what I consider a very important topic about human-centered AI. As Hodan said, I come from the University of Maryland and member of the National Academy of Engineering, and always proud to wave the flag of the Human-Computer Interaction Lab at the University of Maryland, which for almost 40 years has been pioneering fresh ways of designing computers to serve human needs. So the book is out. It's all fresh out. I've begun to get some very nice reviews. The first says it is one of the most important AI books in the last few years, not design books, not necessarily business books, but AI books. But the Forbes magazine speaks for the business community and says, excellent introduction, valuable to management who need to both understand how to better direct AI development and require appropriate AI to solve market and societal challenges. So I'm pleased that I'm off to a good start with a set of these and a few other good reviews. A natural question is, what is human-centered AI? And Hodan set it off right. And the goal is to amplify, augment, empower, and enhance people. And if you're working with people, then you need to understand what they do. And so the central question is, who are the users? What are their tasks? And it is the user's task that we use AI tools in order to further their abilities. And so that's the point. We're focused on users. And so it begins with studying the users. It begins with talking to them, interviewing them, building for them, and testing with users, and revising, refining, and continuously monitoring in ways that I will show from here. As Hodan began to say, the book has a multi-layer approach here. The stakeholders that we talk about, about 25 of them, but I summarize by saying researchers, developers, business leaders, policymakers, and the vast sea of users who can benefit from well-designed AI super tools. So we are always pursuing human values, the rights and social justice and dignity of individuals. And then we want to support self-efficacy, creativity, responsibility, and the social connections that people so eagerly desire in their work and personal lives. We also want to support sustainability and ensuring good outcomes for the planet as well as the individuals. The design aspirations, as we'll come to again and again, are to make reliable, safe, and trustworthy systems, and the levels we will analyze are the team, the organization, industry, and government. So there's 3 platforms that are described in the book: the HCII framework, the design metaphors, and governance structures. We'll go into each briefly in this short talk. At every point, we must remember the threats in designing of any system, especially AI systems, that there are malicious actors who will put these to work to make deep fakes, to spread misinformation, to create cybercrime. We need to be vigilant at every point of these threats. There's the threat of bias in design of systems. There are many forms of bias, and we need to be aware of how to monitor and minimize the bias that's there. And then the flawed software is always a threat. So that's the pitch for the book. And here we go. Part one is the HCI framework, and it goes back to the old way of thinking, which was started in 1980 by Tom Sheridan's levels of automation. And the assumption was you had to choose some point between human control and computer automation. And the more computer automation you had, the less human control you had. And that was a notion I bought into in the early version of my book, Designing the User Interface. And I kept with that for many years, but I began to feel uncomfortable about that because I felt that it was possible to increase the automation while ensuring human control. And that became the theme, ensuring human control while increasing automation. And that meant that there was a separation, that you could have high or low human control and high or low computer automation. That seems like a puzzle, but that's what I want to show how to accomplish in this two-dimensional layout of that idea. So on the bottom, on the x-axis, we go from low to high computer automation, and on the y-axis, from low to high human control. And we think of heavy human control in a pacemaker or airbag, where it should be fully automatic. And sometimes we need that kind of rapid performance to be fully automatic, and we need to make it as reliable as possible. But sometimes we want high human control, human mastery. When you ride your bicycle, play your piano, or play with your children, you want to be fully in control. You want it to be your experience, your skill, and your mastery that you're developing. The place we're looking for today is reliable, safe, and trustworthy. For example, the elevator, which has a high degree of automation in it, lots of AI and machine learning to schedule elevators in modern buildings. But when you come up and press the button, you expect the elevator to arrive, the doors to open, you get in, you press the 6th floor, and it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and you arrive. And it's reliable, safe, and trustworthy because of a long 100-year maturation process. The digital camera is my favorite example, which will reoccur, where we have a high degree of automation in setting the aperture and the focus and the color balance and minimizing hand jitter. Yet it's your picture. You're in control. You tilt and pan, you point, you zoom, and then you click for your decisive moment. So that's where we want to go. But we have to remember always there's a danger of excessive automation, typified by the Boeing 737 MAX crashes of more than 2 years ago, where the designers believed so much in the autonomous design of their system that the pilots were not even aware of the system that tilted the nose down. And when it got faulty data, it continued to point the nose down, and the pilots did not know what to do. They could have turned it off, but they were unaware. There was no display that it was engaged. There was no clear visual display of how to turn it off. So there are dangers of excessive automation. There's dangers of excessive human control, and this is a long issue in the human factors world where interlocks and guides limit what humans could do. So in your self-cleaning oven, once the temperature goes above 600 degrees Fahrenheit, you cannot open the door to prevent the dangers of that happening. And so we need to be aware as we design of these quadrants and the limitations we should have. One example might be pain control devices where the World War II level of morphine drip bags simply dripped the morphine, which was great for relieving pain, but had two dangers: not enough morphine, so the pain remained, or too much morphine, which could be deadly. An automatic dispenser had sensors for heart rate and breathing, and so would limit the too much morphine, but didn't necessarily deal with insufficient morphine. So the patient-guided dispenser, which became standard, allowed the patients to squeeze a trigger and get more morphine. But it was limited. They couldn't do too much so as to prevent their getting excessive morphine. And the current strategies are moving towards patient-guided but clinician-monitored, where a hospital might have a control room with hundreds of devices which they can monitor, collect the data, and thereby improve the performance for all the systems. So that's the strategy we want to look for to make reliable, safe, and trustworthy systems, automate the things that can be reliable, safe, and trustworthy, and give human control for the things that users want to. Not just the patients, but also the clinicians and the designers of the equipment as well. So that's the multi-level strategy that we'll come back to in a short time. And that leads us to the changing of design metaphors to support human-centered AI. And it comes from a belief, as Margaret Bowden said, that robots are simply not people. Joanna Bryson adds, humans, not robots, are responsible agents. So the three philosophical points are that responsibility resides in the humans who design, use, operate, manage, and have decision-making power. Humans are liable legally and morally. We also have to remember there are distinctive capabilities of computers, sophisticated algorithms, huge databases, superhuman sensors, information abundant displays, and powerful effectors. Those are the things we want to take advantage of when we make very distinctive kind of human-centered designs. And then we want to support human creativity, the passion, empathy, humility, and intuition, and leadership and creativity of individuals. So here we go. This is the key slide for this part. There are old metaphors of intelligent agents and teammates or collaborators or partners, and the idea of full autonomy, assured autonomy, and social robots seem to be faded cliches, and we're moving towards a world of super tools, telebots, control centers, and active appliances. I hope you'll take on these new terms. They're maybe less glamorous, but they do convey the notion of what we really want to do. So let's take a look at examples. I've already mentioned a digital camera where the user has an enormous number of controls before, during, and after taking the picture. Yet there's a high degree of machine learning and automation in color balance, focus, and many other factors in these systems. They're rather remarkable, and they've made a world where 90% of the population can get pretty good pictures most of the time. Another widely used machine learning application is digital navigation. I've charted a path from the White House, maybe the Center for Digital Innovation offices, up to College Park, just 8 miles away. And the navigation system gives me 3 possible routes with current information on traffic, and allows the user to preview these possibilities and decide which route to take. And then there's other examples of texting or search auto completion, where I start typing University of Maryland, and I get a set of choices that guide me in what I might want to choose. Spelling correction is a similar idea. Lots of machine learning and automation, but full human control of what really happens. These are basic ideas, but there are more ambitious ones. The Bloomberg terminals have a high degree of machine learning in them. Bloomberg takes in 1.6 million articles per day about business and organizes them according to the needs of individual users, and presents a limited amount just for the uses of the operator. And then the screen is laid out in a spatially stable, non-overlapped style that serves the needs of the user. So with a glance, they get what they need. Now, that kind of design leads to more than 300,000 people paying more than $20,000 a year to have this kind of tool on their desktop. And the idea of Bloomberg terminals for medicine, for aviation, and so on are spreading widely. Active appliances are another notion that's gaining strength as AI-infused designs come to thermostats and Roombas and your rice cooker and your dishwasher and your washing machine. So we're seeing the spread of all these ideas that are getting improved by AI while keeping them reliable, safe, and trustworthy. Another form of active appliance, mentioned pacemaker, which in the old-fashioned days was fully autonomous, but now has moved towards patient control through their cell phone app, and then Medtronic's monitoring of thousands of these devices to improve the algorithms for everyone and for special needs of individual users. So that's the model I think we're moving towards. The telebot idea is maybe best exemplified by the Mars rover, where some fans of autonomy will tell you it's autonomous. It moves around the surface of Mars on its own. It avoids obstacles and precipices. It turns its solar panels. It turns its antennas, all on its own. Yet there's a control room with 80 people who decide what to do, who deal with the problems that arise, who take advantage of opportunities. So here we have this blended approach of a high degree of automation and a high degree of human control, but in a different time scale. The rover moves about and deals with what's happening on the second by second, minute by minute basis, and the operators deal with longer term goals and problems that emerge. Similarly, the telerobots for surgery are advancing surgery in wonderful ways, but as the manufacturer says, robots don't perform surgery. Your surgeon performs surgery with Da Vinci by using instruments that he or she guides via a console. Control rooms have become quite widespread in industrial centers, hospitals, and other places. This counterterrorism center shows again the idea of information abundant displays, people working together, being social, collaborating with people, using machines that serve their needs. So that's the second structure. And for the CDI and ITF communities, I want to spend a little more time on the governance structures, which are key. The book has 15 recommendations, and they're organized at these 4 levels. There's 5 of them that are technical software engineering practices, about audit trails and workflow and bias testing. I think importantly, the safety culture that you build around it, where an organization may have dozens of software teams, but it maintains a unity in its safety culture through its leadership commitment, hiring practices, frequent reporting of failures and near misses, and other forms of internal reviews. Then beyond that, each industry has many dozens of organizations or companies, and here we move to the powerful notions of independent oversight from auditing firms and insurance companies to make sure to promote the acceleration of safe, reliable, and trustworthy computers. So, for example, with self-driving cars, the insurance companies now are dealing with the issue of should they charge higher premiums or lower premiums for self-driving cars? And they don't have the data to tell them what to do. You may want to take a look at a website called tesladeaths.com, tesladeaths.com. The last time I looked reported more than 230 deaths from Tesla. So we don't know how many of them involved autopilot or not. But we do know that there were 11 deadly crashes that the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration began investigating, and will, we hope, lead to a better understanding of what caused these 11 accidents in which self-driving Tesla cars drove into emergency vehicles, stopped at the side of the road, police, fire, and ambulance. And they were, some of them, deadly accidents. Finally, government regulation is another opportunity. Industry has resisted this, claiming that it reduces innovation, but history shows a different picture, that it's possible to have government regulation that advances innovation. When U.S. promoted automobile fuel efficiency standards and safety standards, there was a huge outburst of innovation from industry, which developed much safer cars and much more fuel efficient cars, benefiting everyone and the environment. So these are ways it can be positive. The European GDPR regulations promoted a huge upsurge of maybe 10,000 papers on ways in which explanations could be provided to users in AI systems. So that's what we're going to take a look a little more about some of these items, and I'll just put down a few here, but emphasize the explainable user interfaces and give one example here of how we could make more reliable systems which were understandable to users. So the usual discussion of explainable or interpretable systems is a retrospective approach, which the user maybe makes a request for a job or a parole or a mortgage, and they don't get the answer they want. And so they say, why? And so they get an explanation. This has been the majority, I mean, more than 90% of the work has been on retrospective explanations. And I became less and less happy with that approach. So here I would like to advocate a new approach, which is instead of explaining what was confusing, you want to prevent confusion and surprise. And we're going to do this by prospective user interfaces that are interactive, visual, and exploratory. So let's start with a real simple example of a typical mortgage loan explanation. In a post hoc report mode, you request a mortgage of $375,000. You report household monthly income of $7,000 and liquid assets of $48,000. Now, again, I repeat, this is a very simplified model of mortgage application, but it's one that commonly appears in AI papers. And you get an explanation, and this is considered to be pretty good. We're sorry, your mortgage loan was not approved. You might be approved if you reduce the mortgage amount requested, increase your household monthly income, or increase your liquid assets. And it's pretty good, but it's unsatisfying. You don't know how much you have to increase each of those in order to get the mortgage. So it leaves you still a little confused. By contrast, a prospective user interface could look like this, where you can move a slider about the mortgage amount requested. And if you move to less mortgage amount, you get a more blue, your score goes up to get closer to the score you need for approval. If you could increase your household monthly income or increase your liquid assets, maybe by borrowing from family members, you can move your score up and get to the goal that you want. So I think this kind of strategy which is increasingly being put to work by banks and other institutions, has a lot of possibilities. Here's a great little example, lightweight one, that British librarians put together for recommending books on novels, fiction. So you can choose 4 of these sliders, and you can go from funny to serious, from beautiful to disgusting, from no sexual content to explicit sexual content, from optimistic to bleak. And as you move the sliders, the book covers change, so you know why you got this recommendation. You can see immediately. And newspapers are adopting this with sliders that say politics, sports, entertainment. And as you move the sliders, the recommended articles change. So this provides a foundation for giving human control while using the machine learning and strong computer powers. All right, that's the brief summary. Just to repeat, the HCAI framework, which suggests that we can have high human control and high computer automation by separating out the features, giving humans the control they want for the features they want, and providing reliable, safe, and trustworthy support for the other features. The second shift in thinking is from the older design metaphors to the newer ones of super tools, telebots, control centers, and active appliances. And the third message of the talk and the book is that governance structures can support human-centered AI according to this strategy. I remind you of the layout of the goals we have, and maybe just if you want to keep in touch, the Google group on human-centered AI will get you a weekly note from me that fills in on latest issues that are happening. You can follow us on Twitter. You can visit the Wikipedia page or the website, which has information as we go along. And so I close by saying the future is human-centered. Design becomes human-centered, focuses on user needs, and gives users what they want so they can get about and do their jobs and have some fun. So that's the story. Thank you and paying attention. And I'm glad to discuss these issues and take questions from the audience.
Thanks, Ben. I think one of the things that I liked about your talk and the book more generally is that it takes neither a overly utopian view of AI and it doesn't really take an overly dystopian view either. I think one of the underlying messages I took away is that algorithms and AI can and do improve lives, and you're arguing a way to sort of maximize the value while kind of limiting harms. My first question for you is, the point of human-centered AI is really to focus on the user of systems and to build systems in ways that support them. So the question is, do researchers and companies not already seek to create AI systems that are in the interests of their users and of people more generally?
Good question. Thank you for the summary of the book. Yes, it's neither dystopian nor utopian. It's pragmatic. It seeks to bridge the gap between ethical designs and the practical needs of what we need to do in business. So yes, of course, companies start from a point of view of building systems that they want to be commercially successful, and they want them to be reliable, safe, and trustworthy. However, in the past, I would say, others may disagree, that the emphasis has been on the technology first, technology-led way. And that means you design the best technology you have, and then you put that in the field. Now, 2 years ago, 40 authors from Google, 40 engineers, put out a paper that talked about an unusual title called Underspecification, but a worthwhile read and a courageous paper that talked about the ways in which systems that were designed and built and worked in the lab did not work when they were put out in the field. And so there's a lot of reasons and growing awareness of the problems, but how is it possible that such leading companies would have built systems that were not sufficiently tested and allowed things to go out into the field to be used by real users, yet they were flawed? Now, this doesn't matter for recommender systems so much of recommenders of films or restaurants. If I get a strange recommendation, it doesn't really matter too much. But once I move on to financial, legal, medical, and life-critical applications, then 98% accuracy is no longer sufficient. And so the needs of the real world and life-critical applications mean they have to do much more in the way of testing and evaluation. And I would say moving it all the way back upstream to the design phase and to designing with the user in mind, in participation with users, interacting with real users. That's been, I would say, the main barrier for the AI community. The web design and the e-commerce community has moved really in good ways to user experience testing with A/B testing and many other ways in which e-commerce has been evolved very rapidly because of user engagement, okay, and ways of getting feedback. But those ideas need to be brought over to the AI technology world so that we can make competitive systems. And the notions I bring up are ones that will bring competitive advantages to companies because they'll be reliable, safe, and trustworthy. People will want to use them. They'll be satisfying, just as the digital camera and digital navigation were. Thank you.
On these kind of phrases, one of the questions that we have from our audience is, what is the difference between human-centric, ethical, and trustworthy?
Well, there's about 25 terms that are out there: resilient, robust, reliable, certifiable, auditable, explainable, interpretable. There's a chart in the book with about 25 of these terms. So it's different people have different views of what these systems mean. I try to define them in the book and use them in a careful way. So I've stuck to the phrase of reliable, safe, and trustworthy for the design of features. Ethical issues are important foundations, and I think there's a great deal of discussion of ethical AI, responsible AI. Those are good discussions, but for me, it becomes real when you move to the stage of design, when you're working on a real problem with real users, with consequences for failures. Then you begin to get down to the issues of design and the trade-offs that every designer has to make in order to make a successful design. And understanding those trade-offs in different contexts for different users is really the essence of it. And it's important to understand for those extreme cases, the edge cases of how to limit the dangerous outcomes. So there's a set of processes, there's an international standards organization about human-centered design, which works quite well for human-centered AI, which involves working with users, participating with users, testing with users, remaining in touch, having, for example, feedback mechanisms. You know, the Food and Drug Administration has the Adverse Drug Event Reporting System, where clinicians, nurses, pharmacists, and patients can report the adverse effects of taking certain drugs. And that provides a huge database. And so that enables understanding of when certain medications are inappropriate for certain patients. So Sean McGregor and the Partnership on AI have put up a website. You might want to look at it, called AI Incident Database. AI Incident Database. It reports now over more than 1,000 cases of failures with AI systems. And from that data, we can all learn a lot and more rapidly improve these systems we're looking at.
Thanks. I actually want to pick on this thread of design aspirations and trade-offs, because, you know, in the book and in your talk, you kind of flesh out the design aspirations of trustworthiness, safety, and reliability as necessary to kind of fully support the human values of rights, justice, and dignity that you had at the top of that slide that we saw. So let's say, for example, that there was some AI system that could reduce water contamination and, you know, use AI to help reduce pollutants. That would help some people in parts of the world live more dignified lives. You know, how do the design aspirations of accuracy, making sure that it can really accurately, you know, detect pollutants, effectiveness, and economy, to ensure that, you know, the design aspiration of how do we build this in a way that it's accessible to all people because it's cheap? How do those sorts of design aspirations balance against whether the system is trustworthy, safe, or reliable, as you've defined?
Very appropriate. I'm not an expert in the water systems design, but I'm sure that there's many serious trade-offs. As you mentioned, I think the key one is economy. If it costs 10% more to get cleaner water, is that worth it? If it costs 20% more, 30% more, who pays for it? I mean, there are cases around the world. I'm familiar with, you know, after the earthquakes in Nepal in May 2015, the government mandated more secure construction with, you know, use of steel rebar and cement and modern practices. But these were more expensive. They were difficult for construction companies to learn to use and to get supplies for. So it's not an easy decision about how far to go with making earthquake safety a priority when the costs go up. And you're presenting, and every day there are thousands of such decisions made by experts all around the world who have to make these harsh trade-offs. But for me, the key thing is the openness of the information, so that we know the implications. We know how much benefit there comes from making one choice and how much cost there is from making another choice. And then we have a continuous monitoring and observation of it, so that we can limit the harmful effects that inevitably will come up.
Thanks. Another question that we have from our audience is, for elevators or cameras, for example, it seems like humans just feel like they're in control. You can't decide how soon an elevator comes. Does true control matter, or just the feeling?
I think it's more than a feeling. They have control of the things that matter to them. They get feedback about the time it's taking by watching a display board that shows where the elevator is, how far away, and how quickly it's arriving. So yes, they can't take control over everything. And that's another aspect of design trade-offs. But I think it's more than just a feeling of control. It's maybe that sort of diminishes it. It's the sense of, I want to use this system because I know what's happening. I mean, for my Roomba, I use a Roomba. But it's disturbing to me that I don't know where it's going next. I don't know when it's going to come into my office so that I have to clear out of here. Okay, I don't know how long it's going to take to clean the whole house. So if I'm going out for a walk, when should I come back? So there are ways in which I feel it could be improved, and that's what I'm looking for. I will be a happier user when I get better information about what's being used, and how it's going to perform. And I think we'll have the same kind of design trade-offs in washing machines, in pacemakers, and other kind of systems.
Thank you. I also wanted to touch upon the point around governance and your kind of section on governance. I think a lot of people would say that it's not necessarily a pushback against all regulation. I think that, we can agree that smart regulation can support innovation. I think that, overly burdensome regulation can, in some instances, inhibit innovation. And so the question I really wanted to ask you was, when you think about the frameworks and governance structures that you've proposed, how do you think that would affect different sorts of companies, different size companies? Would implementing many of those workflows and explainable user interfaces that you kind of touched on, for example, be easier for some types of companies? How do you kind of think about that?
Yes, I mean, I think that's the right question. You want to have regulation that's nuanced enough to take into account the small company, the startup, the research group that's doing something, as opposed to Bank America implementing a new mortgage system. And so we've worked that out in other fields, like I would say building zoning codes. The building codes are 30,000 pages of instructions. They guide what's to be done for making safe, reliable, and trustworthy buildings that have safe electrical, safe plumbing, safe construction, structural designs. And so the insurance company becomes an important player here. But yet, if you want to build a substantial new building, you appear before the zoning commission, you get approval, you negotiate that, and then you build your building. The inspector arrives and sees that you've done what you said you were going to do, and then gives you a certificate of occupancy, and now you can get your insurance. So there's a system in place that provides feedback that's appropriate. And we're really concerned about the large systems at scale. Kathy O'Neill's book, Weapons of Math Destruction, catalogs a dozen of these important industries in where opacity, scale, and harm are all in play. And if the system is too opaque and it's yet a large scale system and can harm people, that's where we have to pay attention. If it's a small system, if it's not harmful, it's okay. We don't need to regulate that. So I think this nuanced approach is one way forward in trying to understand. So it means industry needs to work with government. And there is a move in that direction where industries are coming to understand the benefits of regulation to them, the clarity of what they need to do and should do. We agree to these kind of regulations about hiring for on a variety of bases and to promote fairness in hiring. And I think we'll need to do the same thing with AI-based systems.
Yeah, thinking about the kind of role of industry and the role of government, one of the questions that we had from the audience was who decides what human-centered AI is? And thinking more broadly, when it comes to terms like explainable AI, the work that NIST has been doing, it's really been kind of industry-led, or kind of really working a lot with industry to decide what these terms really mean and how we can kind of really use them. So when it comes to human-centered AI, who is it that would be deciding? And what about global perspectives? We've already seen the European approach be slightly different than the US approach. So what's your take on that?
There's a lot packed into your question there, but let me just start with saying thank you for mentioning NIST, which, for those who don't know, National Institute for Standards and Technology in Gaithersburg. And I've worked with them on one of their workshops on trustworthy AI, and they're continuing to do it. They just put out a new report about bias in AI, a well-done 80-page report that provides a set of guidelines and looking at different kinds of bias, and not just the sources of them, but how to deal with them, not just the statistical and computational methods, that are favored in the AI community that are widely discussed, but also the systemic approaches or problems that bring bias, and then the socio-technical systems that can be used to counter them. So I think that's a good approach. Yes, NIST is well respected by industry for involvement with industry in developing standards, guidelines, practices for industry. And they're continuing this. I think March 29th through 31st will be their next workshop on these topics, so you can join in that conversation and participate in. Their steady stream of reports has been quite a influential and helpful guide to this field. So NIST is one organization, and you're asking the central question of who decides. And I advocated these ideas of independent oversight. I proposed a simple, playful idea of a national algorithm safety board, like the National Transportation Safety Board. And so that became one idea of how to do it. But I think the way that emerges is different organizations in the government will develop their own expertise, like the Food and Drug Administration I described already, the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Highway Transportation Safety Administration, the FAA, the Aviation Administration. One after another are developing strategies by which they become more expert. And I encourage those in industry to work with government agencies to help educate them and work with them to set the strategies that will result in meaningful regulation, clarity for businesses so they know what they need to do, and then engages civil society, insurance companies, and auditing companies. I think the big four auditing companies are stepping forward to be advisors about AI, and they can bring expertise from many different parts of an industry, from many companies, and improve the quality overall. So the job, what I'm here for, is to make sure we get reliable, safe, and trustworthy in 15 years rather than 50 years. This is a steady effort. I hope the ideas I advance can accelerate that process.
Thank you. One of the other audience questions is, how do you consider the critiques of human in the loop? The idea that someone placed without complete information really has control / a false feeling of control.
Well, that phrase is very popular, human in the loop. I have a slightly different idea. Here's my bumper sticker: humans in the group, computers in the loop, which takes a little fanciful approach to it. But the suggestion is that people are social, people need to work together, and then computers need to be available and involved in the system. The human in the loop has many aspects to it. There is the momentary decision when computers making a decision, and then the human is in the loop to monitor it. That's often portrayed, but there's many forms of loops. I described the Mars rover. Maybe aviation's a better example. Every millisecond, every second, the jet engines are humming smoothly, autonomously, and reporting back to the pilots. And every minute and every hour, the pilots are making decisions. They're monitoring the temperature and the efficiency of the engines, and deciding what to do next and avoid traffic or weather systems. And so they make decisions on that basis. The air traffic controllers are working on a basis of hourly decisions. And then we have the aircraft maintenance people who are working over a period of days and weeks to look at what's going on. And then we have FAA and management, which is looking over weeks and months and years and looking at the performance of hundreds of aircraft of a certain type to decide whether certain maintenance procedures are necessary. So there's many forms of human in the loop, but I'm going to emphasize the humans in the group, that people are social and computers are in the loop.
Thanks. I also wanted to hear your take on AI that kind of replaces workers, and whether this can follow a human-centered AI approach. Can a system like Flippy the robot that uses AI to cook burgers and fries more effectively be human-centered?
Well, the idea of AI replacement is an old one, and robots and AI, and Martin Ford's book in 2014, The Robots Are Coming, talks about this vast levels of unemployment brought about by AI and robots. And those have been discredited, and we certainly have a high level of employment at this stage and low levels of unemployment with increasing automation. I think the best example is Amazon. In 2012, Amazon bought Kiva Robotics, a robotics company. At that time, Amazon had 125,000 employees, and the belief was their number of employees would shrink. Well, it didn't work out that way. What happened was increased automation with under human control led to higher levels of productivity, quality, lower costs. And so at this point, with a lot of robotics going on at Amazon, okay, in the fulfillment centers, Amazon now has 1.25 million employees, okay, 10 times as many employees. And the evidence very strongly suggests that when well done, high degrees of automation produce the efficiencies and benefits that increase demand and therefore expand markets and expand jobs. So I see a very promising future. Rob Atkinson of the ITIF has written about this very forcefully. For many years, I've been a supporter of what he's been writing, and I support that as well. Chapter 4 of the book discusses these issues and gives some examples. We have many others have come along with the evidence that supports the case that AI and robotics are rarely reducing jobs. They are often increasing the number of jobs that are needed. And I might say, while some complain those jobs may be lower paid or poor quality jobs, that's not always the case. And so we do have some choices to make about how to deal with that. The central question, I think, is the great income inequality that we see at this point, and that is the great. That's really one of the central challenges: how to share the benefits of high degrees of automation.
What are some of the pressing research questions for human-centered AI?
There's lots going on. Of course, there's lots of AI-related ones, but I think in the human-centered AI, we see lots. I mean, let me take one example about audit trails. Civil aviation has been made safe in part by the flight data recorders and the cockpit voice recorders that are so-called black boxes or orange boxes of aviation. And by having a good audit trail, you can do retrospective analysis of failures, as the National Transportation Safety Board does regularly. And that's a real advantage. So over 40 or 50 years, the flight data recorders on airplanes have been refined so that we know what to collect and how to analyze it. And we have tools for doing the analysis. And we need to do the same thing for AI. So as I searched on the idea of audit trails and flight data recorders for robots, if you will, I found very little. There's some about automobile and truck audit trails, which are there in many situations. The Tesla has an audit trail, but in the 2016 deadly crash of a Tesla on autopilot, the National Transportation Safety Board report, a very readable 60-page report, closes with a dozen recommendations, and one of them is better audit trails. So a central research question for me is how to design audit trails for different applications. They'll be very different for medical devices as opposed to self-driving, or rather call them safe driving cars, and for military systems and so on. We need to understand what constitutes a good report, a good audit trail, and then we need to build tools to enable analyses for different kinds of failures. Similarly, a related task is the design of incident reporting systems, which give the feedback from use by thousands of people for large-scale AI systems. So those are some of the research questions. I would say my favorite one is the explainable AI one, or interpretable AI, as Cynthia Rudin calls it. Her work on interpretable AI models won her the $1 million research recognition for the AAAI, the American Association for Advancement of AI, or the Association for the Advancement of AI. That's the kind of work I really want to see.
Thanks. We have another question that's actually getting a lot of thumbs up from the audience, which is, does human-centered AI assume a very anthropocentric worldview? Why not some other view, say an eco-feminist AI or a non-Western take on religious or philosophical values?
Yeah, fair enough. I don't, anthropocentric, maybe human-centered, and you're saying eco or feminist or indigenous, let's say. I think I do mention all of these. I think those diverse perspectives are all valuable. And so we learn from the diversity. We learn from when authors spoke up about racial bias. There's a series of excellent books that gave us a vast learning opportunity and led to rapid improvements by Amazon, Microsoft, and I guess IBM in their facial recognition algorithms. And so awareness of the problem is a starting point. And so you can have different kinds of awareness of the unfairness or bias towards women, minorities, religious groups, etc. And so those are important. I would say I like your mention of the eco ones. I mean, we have to be aware that just, serving human needs is not enough. We want to serve planetary needs. We want to make sure we're protecting the quality of life for people. I think a good source, and I open with this in the book, is the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Those 17 goals laid out in the year 2015 with a destination of 2030 have 169 metrics behind them so as to track how progress is being made along those many goals. So for different communities, they may value certain issues more, like maternal health or safe water. Okay, you've mentioned water purity before, or for food access. There may be all kinds of different, and peace. We have a troubled world with fighting going on in too many places, and that would be another aspiration. We need to look for the ways to make for a more peaceful existence for more people.
I wonder where, you've been thinking about human-centered AI for such a long time. I wonder how you've seen it change, over the years, and where you're really seeing an appetite for it, and who that appetite is coming from.
Yes, I'm aware that, as you say, over the years, this is the path I've taken is not an easy one. Yes, I have a growing set of supporters and sympathizers, and more than 2,000 people signed up for the Google group on human-centered AI. So you can join in that as well. But I would say that's still a modest number. I think there's a long way to go in changing the minds of those more technically oriented. I would say the sympathy has come strongest from the human-computer interaction community, from ethics communities. We've got the IEEE Ethically Aligned Design document, a really good foundation for thinking about these issues. And so we see that uptake. We see the movement forward through IEEE standards bodies that are moving towards developing standards, metrics, and ways of thinking about it. We see with NIST moving forward in its efforts on trustworthy AI. And we see companies being genuinely interested, because the problems that have been pointed out by many authors, Kate Crawford's Atlas of AI, for example, Kathy O'Neill's book I mentioned, or Ruha Benjamin, many others have pointed out the problems. And those are helpful. That clear-headed thinking about problems leads to an awareness, leads to changes, leads to improvements. And so I think we want to have that clear-headed interpretation, and we want to have the move from the ethical and responsible to the design-oriented thinking. So that's where it's going. I would say the traditional AI community has had such huge successes with its approaches over the years that they're still focused on the technology-only solutions, and the expansion to a human-centered or socio-technical approach will take time. But I'm here for the duration. I'm ready to work on this, and I look for those to join me in making this reliable, safe, and trustworthy future for all these technologies.
I think we have time for just one final question, which I'll take from the audience. There is one about whether, a certain policymaker's idea of human-centered AI really just becomes a substitute for their own values. And they give the example of, say Biden or von der Leyen's, understanding of what or what they would consider to be human-centered AI might be very different. So, what's your thoughts on whether policymakers' understanding or push for human-centered AI is actually a substitute for their own values?
I agree that different policymakers will have different positions, and the shift from the Trump administration to the Biden administration led to, many changes, particularly like, the willingness of National Highway Transportation Safety Administration to investigate Tesla's efforts, and their hiring of Missy Cummings as a consultant. She's done great research at Duke University on the problems that emerge with self-driving cars. And so that kind of step forward are small kind of changes. And these differences are real. And that's why industry people and policymakers need to be talking more often. That's why NIST's efforts are so valuable. NIST is inclusive. NIST is participatory. They open the doors to more discussions. And the more discussions we have, the more people become involved, the more open are the decisions, the closer we get to coherence on them. It will never be perfect. There will always be failures. And we need to take a position of humility that says failures are going to be or will occur, and we need to be able to track them so they occur they occur only once. That's the spirit of civil aviation safety. We track what happens, and then we make sure it doesn't happen again. So that's I think those strategies are very effective, imperfect, but very effective, and the best we know how to do.
Well, thank you so much, Ben. Thank you for taking the time. Thank you for your presentation. And thank you to everyone who joined and asked some really interesting questions. If we're able to, we will get the slides and update them on the center's website. And I'd like to thank you, everyone. And if you have any questions for Ben, I'm sure that he would want you to reach out.
Thank you. Yes, I'd be glad to hear from you.
Thanks, everyone.